Welcome to SmithWeekly Discussions, an occasional program for our members of SmithWeekly Research. Please note this program is a private discussion and everything contained herein is for entertainment and educational purposes only. With that, we hope you're in a comfortable position, along with your favorite beverage, to enjoy the discussion. We remind our audience to examine our show notes attached to each of our shows to better understand how our program functions. Before we get into our discussion, we want to say thanks for questions coming from our audience at SmithWeekly, including Matt S., Cindy W., Jack T., and Paul M. On the program today is a new guest and company joining us today. Mr. Tim Warman is on the program. Tim is the Chief Executive Officer of Fuerte Metals. The company is focused on copper and gold exploration in Mexico with its Christina and Yacora exploration projects, which contain resources, as well as focus in Chile with its Placeton and El Cofre projects. Fuerte Metals is listed on the Toronto Venture Exchange under the symbol FMT. Tim, it's a pleasure to have you on the program. Welcome.
Well, thank you. Great to be here.
Yeah, Tim, thank you for coming on to introduce our audience to Fuerte Metals. And typically with this, as it is an introductory program, and of course you're a new guest, tell us a little bit about your background and experience in the junior natural resource sector, because you have been here a while and you've got a number of past successes. And tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm a geologist by training. I don't do a lot of banging on rocks anymore. But yeah, I've been involved in junior mining probably since about the sort of early 90s. I've worked all over the world. I've worked in Africa, Latin America, Europe. But probably some of the companies that people might know or recognize that I've been, really fortunate to be involved with include Aurelian Resources, and of course we discovered the Fruta del Norte deposit in Ecuador back in 2006, and that's now part of Lundin Gold, or is basically Lundin Gold. And I was also on the board of Continental Gold, which had the Buritica project in Colombia, and that was sold to a Chinese mining firm as well. And then I guess most recently, I was the CEO of a company called Fiore Gold. And Fiore was an interesting one because in 2017, we went out and we did a $17 million Canadian raise. We bought a bankrupt mine in Nevada for $5 million US. And that mine had been built like 2 years before for $100 million and then had quickly gone bankrupt. So we picked this asset up. Nobody else wanted it, and we turned it around. We got it running and generating free cash flow. Then 5 years later, we were taken over by Calibre Mining for $170 million. And in that interim period, we never issued another share. So it was a bit of a success for our shareholders and our investors. And then now I'm running Fuerte Metals, which is an interesting new firm.
Tim, thank you for that. Appreciate you highlighting over some of those. And of course, a couple of those I remember myself here and have followed some of those companies. And good on you for the last transaction there with Fiore and the Calibre transaction there. With that, I have to ask, because you've been here in the sector for quite some time, how do you look at the market today for the juniors as far as conditions and sentiment out there for copper and gold juniors? And what is your outlook in the coming months for the sector?
Yeah, it's certainly been an interesting time. I mean, we're seeing, record prices for gold. It seems almost every week it hits a new high. And I think, the producers, some of them are doing very well, generating really good cash flow. A few of the larger, producers are really struggling, and I think you're seeing that particularly, Newmont's results coming out last week took a bit of a hit. But I think, some of the slightly more nimble, I guess, companies like a Kinross or an Agnico or things like that are doing very well. But all of that is not really translating down to the juniors. There's just not a lot of, I guess, investor interest or market interest in Explorcos, and that's really been the condition. Probably for the last 5 or 6 years, and it's interesting too because you're seeing the same thing in copper. I mean, copper prices are pretty solid, and yet you're not seeing a lot of interest. And so, what's really kind of developed as a theme over the last couple of years is that companies really need, I guess, almost like a sponsorship. They need a series of, strong backing shareholders to ensure they have that access to capital. And, whether that's, a Pierre Lassonde and Ross Beatty, like in our case, or whether it's, the Lundins or Eric Sprott or Frank Justra, that's really been, I think, a key differentiator for within that junior Explorco market. It's just really that sponsorship that gives both credibility and also access to capital.
Yeah, very good points. It's been a pretty rough road for sure for a lot of folks, and definitely we haven't seen that flow down. And it seems that there's always some type of broad market distraction, Tim, as far as whether it's AI or tech companies or focus on global economic events or geopolitical issues now that we're seeing that seem to be escalating, sadly, very sad. All those pieces that play into this, and then also just that ability to be able to raise capital, is, as you said, is very important, and the networking within the sector is very important. But I do see that we will have a period in the sun for the junior sector. And of course, as you well know, company specific deliverables, like discovery success at the drill bit is obviously well rewarded. So
Yep.
appreciate your thoughts on how you look at this market. Okay, well, why don't we get into a brief overview of Forte and why you took the job as CEO coming out of Fiore, and then we'll get into a couple details.
Yeah, so I've actually been through this cycle of being involved with the sale of a company, taking 6 months off, and then starting something new. I think this was my third go round on that after we sold Aurelian and Continental got sold and Dalradian got taken private, and so anyway, when I came out of it this time, I thought, I want to do something a little different, maybe get involved in a bit more copper exploration. It's obvious. I think the underlying fundamentals for copper are pretty obvious, when you look at the supply demand curve. And that's, I guess that's where copper is a bit different from gold, is that you don't have that classic kind of supply demand play that you do in copper. But anyway, I was looking around for copper, and there was a couple of guys I'd worked with in the past in Toronto from a firm called Metallus Capital. And they had a company in Chile with these projects, Placeton and El Cofre. Really, really interesting copper porphyry exploration targets, really sitting in the middle of a really exciting existing deposit that was sort of 50-50 JV between Teck and Newmont. And they needed a CEO who had a bit of capital markets experience, but also, could explain things geologically. And I think I kind of fit that bill, and I knew these guys and had had a bit of a success in the past. So I went down to Chile and I looked at the project and I was really impressed with it. And so I took that company on, but I knew that we were going to need to have more than just one project. I didn't want to have single country, single asset company. So we had talked to a few firms, but we met the guys at a company called Trinity Partners. And Trinity Capital Partners is basically very close with Pierre Lassonde. And they had put together a private company in Mexico with a guy named Charlie Roncos. And Charlie was the former VPX at Goldcorp, back when Goldcorp was a good company, and also with Glamis Gold before then. And of course, Goldcorp had acquired Glamis. And Charlie, when he left Goldcorp, had picked up what he said were his two favorite assets, these two projects in Mexico, one called Christina, which is a gold, silver base metals project in Chihuahua, and then another copper project called Yecra over in Sonora. And we looked at the idea of putting these two companies together, this private company that Trinity had founded and the public company that I was running. And we really liked the idea, and particularly we liked the idea because they had a shareholder lineup that was really impressive. They had Pierre Lassonde as a major shareholder. They had Agnico Eagle as a major shareholder. They had a number of high net worth guys in the mining industry. And then from our side, we had Ross Beatty and his group, who had originally put together the company I was running, which was called Atacama Copper at the time. And so, we put the companies together back in, I think we finalized the deal in February. We did a financing in February. We raised just under $13 million. And again, this was where that idea of sponsorship comes in. We were able to do that in a reasonably tough market in a straight share deal, no warrants, keeps the share structure very clean. And so now, we've built up not just a really good management team with myself and with Charlie, who's an incredible explorationist with a long track record of success, but also that shareholder registry, and I think that's really one of the things that's differentiated us from some of the other Explorcos out there. So, Pierre Lassonde owns just under 12% of us. Agnico owns about 8.5%, and then Trinity Capital Partners, which is effectively Pierre's merchant bank, owns another 17%. So you can see there's that very, very strong shareholding. Management and board, by the way, owns just over 12%. So we're all very invested as well. And we've kept the capital structure very clean. We only have 60 million shares outstanding. There are just a few broker warrants from the financing. So fully diluted is only 66 million. We've got a strong treasury, and I think that that's really put the company in a good position to grow.
Tim, thank you for that. And it looks like you went ahead and touched on capital structure here. So I'll avoid asking too many questions there, but you covered major shareholders. Just one question, and of course, shares outstanding here. With the cash on hand and with continuing exploration work that'll be going into 2025, how far do you think that gets the company down the runway? And how do you see financing needs going into, say, 2Q 2025?
Yeah, I mean, I think we raised about 12.9 million. We still at the last financials had about just under 8 million left of that. And we're primarily spending that on drilling in Mexico. And Mexico's a very cost-effective place to drill. We're drilling for about $135 a meter US, and which is incredibly low. So it's really able to stretch those exploration dollars quite a long way. So we're fully funded, really probably until about the middle of next year. The plan is we're going to finish up a 20,000 meter drilling campaign. That'll run kind of till the middle of next year. And then we'll look at doing a resource estimate on our Christina project, focused on an underground high-grade resource there. We're also doing a little bit of work in Chile right now. We're just wrapping up a geophysical survey down there that I can talk about a bit later. But really, I think we're pretty well funded right now. We're not looking to finance anytime soon.
Very well. No, I appreciate the comments on that. And of course, we've got members of the audience, including myself, that are always out there looking to support good companies. So it's always good to get a rough idea of how the timing looks on that. With you mentioned a few of the key staff already, but just talk a little bit more about some of the folks that are supporting you and the vision, of course, for the company and what they're bringing to the table, Tim.
I think we've tried to keep the management team and the kind of overhead and admin structure pretty light. We don't actually have an office anywhere. I'm based in Toronto. Our EVP Exploration, Charlie Roncos, is based in the US. And then our CFO is based actually out of the Ross Beaty's Lumina Group office in Vancouver. And he's actually works for Ross's Lumina Group full time, and then is sort of our part-time CFO, which works quite well as an exploration stage company right now. And beyond that, we don't really have any other staff. We have one guy in Chile who manages things down there, and everything in Mexico is run through either contractors, law firms, accounting firms, that kind of thing. So in terms of the rest of the people, really, it's myself and Charlie running the company. And then, we've got a lot of people in that kind of orbit, as shareholders and advisors. So we've got, well, and it's particularly important because we are looking to grow the company, and we're looking for other assets. Our shareholders really liked what we did with Fiore, where, we bought a producing asset, and then we never issued another share. We just ran the company off cash flow from that producing asset until we sold the company, which kept our, dilution essentially to zero, between the time we bought the asset and sold the company. So our shareholders are very strongly supportive of that idea, and it gives us a really interesting network of people that are out there, looking at projects, getting deal flow, having projects brought to them. So you've got the Trinity Capital guys, you've got Agnico, you've got the Ross Beaty's Lumina Group, and then you've got another group called Edgecrest, which split off from Trinity recently. One of the partners left, and so he's still a major shareholder, and they're also seeing a lot of project flow. So it's given us a really wide network out into projects that are available out there.
Tim, that sounds good, and maybe there'll be an opportunity to move your pretty much empty office down into Mexico or Chile as the new HQ, as of course Canada continues to have a little more increased problems on the administrative side. So maybe that's an option in the future. Seeing that happen with some of these other companies out there that are focused on
Yeah.
Central and South America. And it sounds like you guys have got this very lean, so I can appreciate that very much. Well, short of any other administrative comments, let's talk about the core focus project for the company, which is the Christina project in Chihuahua State, Mexico. talk about the recent drill results, and really those have been flowing out over the last few months. And then, of course, you guys are continuing efforts into what we would consider the winter time to finish out the current drill program sometime in early 2025.
Christina's an interesting project. So this is one of the ones that used to be a Goldcore project that Charlie Roncos had acquired from Goldcore when he left them. And it's been explored since about 2010. It's gone through a series of ownerships, and the ownership changes have all been because one company acquires another. So there have been about 4 or 5 acquisitions, and interestingly, Charlie's been involved with all of those companies. So he's got the full history on that project. So we know everything that's been done. We have all access to all the drill core and the assay results and everything, and it's all been very consistent, which is nice from a geological point of view. But Christina is an interesting project. It's a series of veins, and it's very typical kind of Mexican vein style deposit. But these are big, big fat veins. The veins are 10 meters wide. They run across country for, as far as we've mapped them, about 5.5 kilometers. And there's a whole series of parallel veins. So you've got, multiple opportunities to add resources to this project as you drill it. And up to date, the drilling has been mainly focused on one vein called the Guadalupe vein. And that's where the existing resources sit right now. And that's really just because of the drilling density there on that Guadalupe vein. But we're now starting to step out and test some of the adjacent veins as well. And in fact, I think we're just on hole 5 on a new vein, a new parallel vein called Los Ingleses. And we're waiting to get results back from that. But so we're really looking to grow this Christina project. It's a polymetallic deposit. It's primarily gold and silver. It's got a bit of base metals in it, and we think it can be very similar to some of the other nearby mines in Mexico. So, for example, just on the about 60 kilometers away from us, as the crow flies, Fresnillo has a large mine called San Julian, and San Julian mine produces something like 200,000 gold equivalent ounces a year. And again, it's a mix of gold, silver, and some base metals. It's an underground mine. They're mining vein systems there that are actually narrower and lower grade than what we're seeing at Christina. But Charlie and I actually visited that Fresnillo mine about a month ago, and it's this incredibly modern underground mine, very very mechanized, very very well run. And we looked at that and said, "Oh, that's a great example of what Christina could be." And so the goal really is to keep drilling Christina. And we're having some good success in finding these high grade underground zones, and some of the early drill results from earlier in the summer. We hit 10.7 grams per ton gold equivalent over 7.8 meters, and that's a true width. So you see these are quite big fat veins. 9.4 grams per ton gold equivalent over 2.2 meters, 27.8 grams per ton gold equivalent over 1.2 meters. So, some really nice thick sections or intersections with really good grades. And the interesting thing about Christina is that there's a really significant vertical extent to this deposit. It's not just in your typical kind of Mexican epithermal vein system, or really epithermal vein systems anywhere. The vertical extent on these deposits only tends to be maybe 100, 150 meters. But in Guadalupe, on the Guadalupe vein, we're actually seeing at least 300 meters of vertical extent and still open at depth. We're still getting 7.5 gram intercepts over, multiple meters at a depth of 300 meters below ground surface. So it gives you a sense of there's real size potential here on this. And so anyway, what we're aiming to do at Christina is keep drilling. As I said, we're going to drill about 20,000 meters in total. We'll drill till probably sort of May, June of next year, and then we'll start a resource estimate. We'll do an updated resource estimate. The current resource on Guadalupe is a based on an open pit model. We don't think that's the right mining method for Guadalupe, and of course, that was kind of more germane during the previous president of Mexico talking about banning open pit mining. But in this case, technically, open pitting doesn't really make sense for this deposit. It's really a high grade, typical underground type structure, and so that's where we're taking this project. And then once we get that resource estimate out, we'll look at, do we want to keep drilling? Do we want to keep adding ounces, or should we start looking at a PEA and starting to put some economics about it? But it's a really neat deposit, and I think it's going to have a lot of room to keep growing as we keep drilling in it.
Very good information. I want to come back to a comparable here in a moment and discuss that. But just overall here on timing, talk a little bit about assuming there's sufficient results, which sounds like there is going to be, to have a good resource update during 2025. What would be the timing on a PEA for the project as you envision it now? I mean, obviously it's a project that's going to expand most likely, but if you guys were to put out a PEA on the back of success with this current campaign, what do you think the timing would be for that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think if we finish wrapping up the drilling in kind of May or June next year, we'll do the resource update. Of course, the resource update will start before we finish the drilling. They'll overlap quite a bit, and then depending on what assuming the resource update looks interesting enough and big enough that we think it could support a PEA, I think we could aim to have a PEA done by late in Q4 of 25. Again, we haven't really sat down and scheduled this thing out yet, but that's a kind of rough estimate. Say, call it late 2025.
Okay, back to comparables here. You have a good idea here because you've looked at a lot of projects in Mexico. You've done a lot of comparisons of these epithermal deposits, but give us an idea on what you see here is on scale. I mean, I know this is very subjective, Tim, based on the fact that you guys got a lot more work to do, but what do you think is an ideal scale project to be attractive in this region of Mexico? And perhaps a comparable, you said Fresnillo's Julian mine. Maybe just give our audience a bit of a context in terms of what the size is there and production profile so we have a little bit of a comparable. I know it's not the same, it's not apples to
Yeah.
apples, but give us some context here.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think, right now the existing resource at Christina is about 750,000 ounces in indicated and a similar amount in inferred. So, roughly 1.5 million ounces all in. But it's an open pit model. So the grades are, they're about 1.3 grams per ton gold equivalent, which again, we don't really think is the right approach to this. We think a higher grade underground mine is the way to go here. So, I think if you look at what's the potential, and again, I mean, it's got to be drilled out. So this is my inner geologist coming out and doing a bit of arm waving here, but I think it's not unreasonable to think that you could have a similar underground resource in the Christina vein where it's been drilled now as currently exists as an open pit resource. So maybe 1 million ounces, 1.5 million ounces, all told in that area. And then, if you look at it, you've got 3 or 4 parallel vein systems, and we haven't even drilled out the full extent of the Guadalupe vein. But on those parallel veins, if you could get something, similar in terms of, 1 million ounces over a sort of 1.5 to 2 kilometers of strike length, I think, eventually this thing has the potential to be a sort of 3, 4, 5 million ounce deposit. It's going to take some drilling. Fortunately, drilling, as I said, is quite inexpensive in Mexico, and other than the sort of July and August months where it rains as the hurricanes come over Mexico, you can drill pretty much 10 months of the year down here. So it's a fairly straightforward place to work in that regard. And yeah, so I mean that's kind of what we're aiming for. And if you looked at um, what kind of grades we'd like to see something over 6 grams per ton for underground mining. I mean, you could mine a lot lower grades underground in Mexico than you could, say, in other countries like Canada or the US, where the cost structures are a little higher. But San Julian, as I said, it produces about 200,000 gold equivalent ounces per year, and that's made up of gold and silver as well as some base metal component as well. So, again, I think you could get something similar here at Christina. Once we get the project fully drilled out, and I think that's the kind of size of project I think you need to go ahead with in Mexico. You're probably looking at minimum 1.5 to 2 million ounces to really kick off and make a construction decision on something like this.
Very well. No, I think that gets us a pretty good indication here, and definitely you can wrap a company around this. But you guys, of course, have a pipeline as well that we'll talk about here in just a moment. And then I'll come back and talk government and things in the two jurisdictions you guys are focused on here in a moment as well. But why don't we switch gears here and go to the second project focus of the company? This is the Placeton project in Chile. Cover the status of this project and the next work that the company is planning.
So it's an interesting project. It's a little earlier stage than than our Christina project in Mexico. In fact, it's never actually had a drill hole put into it. But what was really interesting to it for us, or about it for us, was its location. And it sits, it's about 50, 60 kilometers east of the city of Vallenar, which is a mining city in the north central part of Chile. And it's actually just about due west from the Vicuña district, where BHP has just bought Filo, and there's another couple of other promising deposits in that area. But interestingly, the Filo deposit and the ones around it, they're up at 5,000 meters in the Andes, and I've worked on projects like that just a bit to the south in the Andes, and I can tell you it's a challenging place to work. So the project we're looking at, the Placeton, is only at about 3,800 meters. It's a lot lower in elevation. It's a lot easier to get to, a lot easier to work there on a kind of year-round basis. But it also, in addition to being, well located, it sits right in the middle of one of the largest undeveloped copper gold porphyry projects in the Americas rather, which is a project called Nueva Union. And Nueva Union is a 50-50 JV between Teck and Newmont, and it consists of two porphyries about 30 kilometers apart. And we have two targets, one called Placeton and the other one called Caballo Muerto, that sit literally completely surrounded by the Teck Newmont ground and sort of halfway between their two porphyry systems. And they're interesting, from a technical point of view. They look like some really good exploration targets. They've got copper, gold, molybdenum, soil anomalies, and rock chip anomalies over top of them. They've got geophysical anomalies that look like porphyry targets right over top of them. In fact, we're just finishing up some more geophysics on them right now. And they've got these beautiful alteration signatures that you can see on satellite images and you can see on the ground as well. But they've never had a drill hole put into them. And so, we're actually quite excited about the possibility of drilling those, hopefully as early as, this Southern Hemisphere summer season, which is just starting now. And we think that these are big targets. They sit right in the middle of an established giant porphyry system, and they've really got the potential to be almost game changers. If we hit something interesting on those, and by interesting I would say 100 plus 200 plus meters at 0.5% copper or half a gram gold, which is what they're seeing at El Moro, the Newmont side of the porphyry system there. I think, it could be a real overnight game changer. Now, we're not going to develop a porphyry system or a porphyry deposit on our own. I think, you know, we don't want to fall into that trap of being a junior miner with a $150 million market cap and a $5 billion capex project to build. But I think given the location, there's some obvious synergies with the Teck and Newmont project that completely surrounds us here. So that's really a quick summary of Placeton. It's exciting, but it needs to be drilled.
I think it adds additional potential for the company here. So you guys aren't necessarily a one-trick pony here, that you have two different projects. One's a development project that may be looked at in-house, and then you have a potential discovery strategy that would result in something potentially very large if it's anywhere comparable to what we have surrounding, that would obviously be suited for a bigger company to take on. So I
Yeah.
think this is a interesting approach that you guys have already taken on this, and of course the pipeline is pretty interesting here. Are there any other near-term plans on projects in the portfolio, such as Yacora, El Cofre? Is there any strategy there at this point in the near term as far as exploration work? Are these to be monetized? What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, so I mean the El Cofre project in Chile, I think we're looking for a home for that one. It's not a kind of core focus for us right now. We're more focused on Caballo Muerto and Placeton, the big porphyry targets. In Mexico, the Yecora project is interesting because it's a copper silver moly project. It's got a resource. It's about 35 million tons at about a 1.1% copper equivalent, but it's a little small right now. And what I think really makes a lot of sense for that is some kind of a consolidation strategy in that part of Sonora. There are a number of other similar copper deposits in that area, and I think it would make a lot of sense to look at combining those. We've had some initial discussions with some of our neighboring companies, including Minera Alamos, who are literally right next door to us, about maybe trying to put these things together. But I think people were waiting to see what was going to happen in Mexico with this talk of an open pit mining ban, because a lot of these copper projects are going to be open pit. And fortunately, the new president has been very supportive, very said some very encouraging things about developing copper resources, particularly in northern Mexico, which is where we are. And so I think people are getting a bit more comfort with that idea. And we're sort of seeing a veering away from some of those really hardline policies of her predecessor. So I think those discussions may accelerate over the winter this year. But we'll see how that one goes. It's a project that we think has a lot of potential, but probably would benefit from some consolidation in that area.
Tim, that sounds good. I appreciate you giving your thoughts on the remaining pipeline you guys have there, just with open pit, and then I'll move into government relations here in a moment, Tim. But what are your thoughts on open pit mining?
I don't have a problem personally with open pit mining. I mean, it's the funny thing about mining is if you look at the footprint of mining, it's pretty small, in comparison to, say, other things like farming, for example. I mean, your average mid-sized farm probably occupies 10 times as much space as a large mine. And, mines run out, they'll be rehabbed, and, a lot of these things, can be returned to other uses. So I personally don't have a problem with open pit. I think, where it makes sense, underground mining is the way to go, as it does in our Christina project. So not really an issue for us so much, but yeah, I'm not too concerned about it.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. I mean, the blasphemy of solar fields and wind turbine fields is far worse than an open pit mine, which obviously has so much more wealth that can be generated out of it. And then, of course, the different mining methods and the applications. Obviously, in some parts of the world, it makes sense. Other parts, it may not make sense. You have water issues in some places. You have dry conditions in others. So I think this blanket approach to one particular jurisdiction is a bit nuts. And the reality is that really any country, mining is a very important backbone to natural resource independence and security.
Yeah,
And so lots of issues there, but you and I can think of lots of other industrial applications that people have utilized on land that is blasphemy on the land, to be honest. But let's not get into energy and solar panels and all that stuff. Let's keep focused on the company here. You guys have two jurisdictions, Mexico and Chile. Both these jurisdictions have been tricky in the recent years, and of course, there's a history of good times, and then of course policy changes. We've seen difficulties a little bit in Chile with some of the smaller juniors, not getting approval and then having that overturned, referring to Rio 2, for
yeah,
example. Just different issues and challenges with community and then also the bigger government, whether maybe the state government's supported, but the federal government's being a pain in the rear. Um, just talk about how you guys look at community and government relations, Tim, because this is no easy area, but of course you've dealt with it for much of your career. But talk about your comfort level dealing with exploration and development stage projects in these two jurisdictions, how you're approaching those important relationships, community education, assisting government to understand and also get through the regulatory burden to help pave the road for advancement of these projects.
it's a good question, and I have to say that I've worked all over the world, and I can tell you right now from personal experience, there are no easy jurisdictions to work in. No jurisdiction is painful. No jurisdiction is without some kind of weird, whether it's community or government or politics or whatever it is. And so, you know, Chile and Mexico are no different in that regard. The one really nice thing I think that helps a lot is that both of those are traditional mining company or mining countries, particularly the areas that we're in, in Chihuahua and in the Atacama region in Chile. And so that makes a huge difference because it's not just the local population is accustomed to mining, they work in mining. The governments are used to it, they know how to permit it. I used to work for Delradian Resources, which is working in Northern Ireland. And one of the biggest issues there is that, there just isn't a mining culture in Northern Ireland. And so the bureaucrats have no idea how to evaluate a mining project, and they really have to be, they're on a huge learning curve as well, which slows things down incredibly. But in Mexico, that's just not the issue, or in Chile. And so in Mexico, obviously, community is a huge issue there. We are very fortunate to be in an area that only has one ejido, and the ejidos are these agricultural communities. They own the land. And we actually have an agreement in place that takes us all the way through to production with our only ejido, which is a huge advantage. It's not a particularly heavily populated area. People tend to come up there seasonally to do some farming, but there aren't a lot of people living on the property. And the local municipality has been extremely supportive. They've come out to site, they've visited the project, they've said, "Look, is there anything we can do to help?" I think one of the great things about engaging with governments is that if the communities are on side, the governments tend to follow their lead. They don't want to buck the trend. With the people who are actually locally on the ground. We haven't seen any issues in permitting in Mexico. I mean, obviously, we're at a fairly early stage with drilling on both Christina and Yekra, but we have all our permits in place there. So I have to say, Mexico has been, you know, overall not particularly difficult to work in. I think we've done our homework. We've got the agreements we need in place, and that's worked well. And then in Chile, there's been a lot of noise. Most of that has been around more advanced projects like Alex Black's Rio 2, which eventually was permitted, and now he's got his construction financing and is going ahead with it. So I think that's been a bit of a success. Where we are, we're really just getting to the drilling stage now, and I think the in terms of permitting, that's reasonably straightforward for drilling projects in Chile, particularly in the area that we're in. The one area where we've had to do a little bit of work was with one of the local indigenous communities. There's an indigenous community that owns some of the land on one side of our project. It's not where we're looking to drill or work right now, but obviously you want to have good relations with those groups. And the previous management of our company had gone somewhat offside with that community, and so we've done a lot of work to kind of repair that relationship. It does take a lot of work, but we've got to the point now where when Charlie goes down to Chile, he goes out for dinner with the president of the indigenous community, and so I think we're slowly rebuilding that level of trust with those guys. And it hasn't slowed us down right now, but obviously, as we move forward, we want to make sure that people are on side and aware of what we're doing as well. And in terms of permitting and things like that in Chile, again, we're at the early stages there, but so far, we haven't seen any issues there at all.
Tim, thank you for that. Yeah, certainly. I mean, exploration permitting is a little bit easier than mine permitting for sure, but appreciate your comments on how you guys are approaching community in these jurisdictions and then also dealing with the government and establishing those relationships because it is very important. And the educational component is always very important, career development and all those things. I think that that's very important. Local service providers and the things you guys are doing, even at this early stage as a small junior, to progress those relationships. So appreciate the comments on that. Tim, just with respect to listings, is there any plans in the coming months to add a U.S. OTC listing for the company, or do you see that that is not a priority at this point?
Well, interestingly, we just on Friday got our OTCQB listing. So
Good.
so we were pretty excited about that. It took a little while. I don't know, for some reason it was a painfully slow process. But yeah, it's FUEMF is our OTCQB symbol.
Congratulations on that. With respect to just overall listings, just to push you a little bit more here, do you guys think as the company becomes more successful here in the future, does regular big board TSX listing make sense? Just talk about maybe how you look at the future of listings for the company.
I have to be honest, and again, this goes back to a geologist talking about capital markets, but I've never really understood the value of getting on a big board listing on the TSX. It's more complicated with some of the reporting and things like that. We might look at it, but again, I don't think there's any urgency to it. We're a 60, $70 million Canadian market cap company right now. I think the TSX venture listing is probably the right one for the time being.
Makes sense. No, I appreciate your comments and thoughts on that. That's always useful. Well, Tim, short of any other comments you wanted to add about the company, let's leave it there for now for this introduction program, and I'll leave you with our final couple questions here. For potential investors who are listening in, the company has a market capitalization of about 60 million Canadian dollars. Why should Forte Metals be considered within the institutional, family office, and retail investors' portfolio at this stage?
Yeah, I think for a number of reasons, and I think what we've tried to do is put together all of the key factors that you need for success right now. So we've got, a management team that's got a history of success and frankly of making money for our shareholders. We've got an incredible shareholder roster, with people like Pierre Lassonde, Ross Beatty's group, Agnico Eagle. and some of these major funds out of Canada. And we've got some great projects in good locations, and I think we're well funded to add value with those, and and some real game changing projects like our ones in Chile, the Placeton project. So where if we get some success, you might see a real transformation of the company. So I think it's that whole mix of factors that you need to succeed, and we've got them all under one roof.
And Tim, for those interested, what is the best way for them to get in touch with the company?
Our info email address, I get copied on all of that. So if you want to get a hold of me, just info@fuertemetals.com or our website, fuertemetals.com.
Tim, excellent. Well, thank you for giving us an introduction of the company. Best of luck in the coming months with Forte, and we look forward to having you back soon.
Thanks very much.